Welcome, I'm Deanna Cohen, CEO and co-founder of Plastic Pollution Coalition. Thank you for joining our June webinar, Plastic-Free Seas, diving into how plastic impacts health, climate, and our oceans. Plastic Pollution Coalition is a nonprofit communications and advocacy organization that collaborates with an expansive global alliance of organizations, businesses, and individuals to create a more just, equitable, and regenerative world free of plastic pollution and its toxic impacts. We would like to say a special thank you to any attendees who are joining us today from the Hollywood Climate Summit, of which Plastic Pollution Coalition is a sponsor. The Hollywood Climate Summit is an annual multi-day conference that creates the community space for thousands of cross-sector entertainment and media professionals to take on climate. Okay, let's get started. We have 4 poll questions today, and we want to get a sense of who's joining us. So each question will only appear for 20 seconds. Please answer quickly. Poll question number 1. Where are you joining us from today? Please select one. Great. Well, it looks like we have about 91% of our folks joining us from North America, but also people tuning in from Europe, North Asia, Central and South America, East Asia, Africa. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Oh, and the Middle East. Okay, poll question number 2. What best describes the sector in which you work? Please select one. Well, it looks like we have a wonderful mix of folks from all the different sectors, including corporations, business, education and academia, students, government and policy, healthcare, media, the NGO space, research, and other. I wonder what other is. Let's go on to poll question number 3. Poll question number 3. What does the ocean mean to you? Please select all that apply. Well, it looks like the ocean means a lot to everyone. It gives us spiritual and mental well-being, physical and environmental well-being. It's a place to recreate and enjoy, and it's a resource for scientific research, food, and raw materials. So let's go on to poll question number 4. What do you believe is the most effective way to stop ocean pollution? Please select one. Interesting. It looks like 42% of people tuning in say halt the production of plastics. Others say federal, state, and or local policy, and then to replace traditional plastics with bioplastics. Interesting. That's 16% of people. 3% are saying increase recycling infrastructure, and 13% are saying refuse single-use plastic in our daily lives. So thank you for participating in the poll questions. Today, we're going to hear from our panelists. Dr. Wallace J Nichols, author of Blue Mind and a founding member of Plastic Pollution Coalition. Imari Walker-Franklin, PhD, research chemist at RTI International and author of Plastics and Her Deepness. Dr. Sylvia Earle, president and co-chair of Mission Blue and National Geographic Explorer in Residence.
Water is really the basis of life. We are all made of mostly water. We all spent the first 9 months of our lives swimming around in this dark watery pool called our mother. And we come into the world and we live on a water planet. When you realize that your water is a source of health and wellness, physically and mentally, that is basically Blue Mind. People sometimes think Blue Mind is all about the ocean, but it isn't. It's about oceans, lakes, rivers, ponds, swimming pools. Even your kitchen sink can be a source of Blue Mind. Knowing that you have the ability to escape and get into the water, to see the world differently, to change the way you feel, is really so powerful. Recovery on Water is a group in Chicago that gets women working through their battle with cancer out on the water to row together. Absolutely phenomenal. A group called Operation Surf helps veterans connect with the ocean through surf therapy, and they're having amazing results. We know from creative people like Pharrell Williams that water is his source of creativity. He gets his music from the sound of water. In the same year, the Golden State Warriors, the New England Patriots, the Chicago Cubs all implemented flotation therapy, and they all won the national championships. It's pretty incredible to think that these elite athletes just floating in water and calming their minds, getting their blue minds on to enhance their athletic performance.
When I first get in, see where my mind goes, a decision I might need to make in my life or something like that, and you kind of just process and take it in.
We get so much from the waters of the world, and we have so much we can give back. And when that connection starts to flow, amazing things can happen.
Thank you. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Wallace J Nichols. Wallace J Nichols is a marine scientist and is perhaps best known for his book, Blue Mind, which has gained international acclaim and explores the vast cognitive, emotional, psychological, social, and spiritual wellness benefits that water provides to all of us throughout our lives. Jay has authored over 200 publications, and his work has been featured in major media outlets worldwide, including BBC, CNN, National Geographic, and Scientific American. His contributions to the field of marine conservation have earned him membership in the Explorers Club and the University of Arizona's Global Achievement Award. And we chose to nominate Jay for the Earthshot Prize this year. Welcome, Jay.
Yeah, thank you, Dianna, and everybody who's participating. Such a great panel, such an incredibly important topic. I'm just going to give you a little background of what brings me here, talking about plastic pollution, kind of start at the beginning and then connect the sea turtles that I love so much to this issue of plastic pollution through this concept of Blue Mind, which you heard a little bit about in that video. So I go kind of low tech on Zoom these days. I love these flashcards. So hopefully there you go. I'm going to talk about sea turtles first and my love for sea turtles, and spent the past 30 plus years studying the ocean, studying sea turtles and their habitats around the world. It turns out sea turtles are kind of the poster species for everything that is going wrong in terms of the ocean's health, but also in terms of everything that is working, because sea turtle populations around the world are making a strong comeback. They're a sign of hope, and we can learn a lot of lessons from sea turtles. Back in 1996, we put a satellite transmitter on a sea turtle named Adelita. She was a loggerhead turtle who had been raised in captivity for a decade. Put this transmitter on her shell, and she began to swim off the coast of Baja California, Mexico, and headed all the way across the Pacific Ocean home to her nesting beaches where she was born in Japan. Among other things, she was the first animal ever tracked across an ocean. We shared her track online. That was a first. But really the big breakthrough that's relevant to this conversation is she swam right through an area that is now known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is neither a patch nor great, but it is certainly full of plastic pollution. So I began in 1996, really going more deeply into this issue of plastic pollution in the ocean environment and its impact on sea turtles. A few years prior to that, visiting nesting beaches around the world, I can remember whenever we would encounter pieces of plastic, we would pick them up, put them in our pockets, and then the beach would be kind of pretty clean again. And little by little, we started to see the invasion of this material on these beaches as time went on and the problem began to worsen. Sea turtles became kind of one of the poster species for the problem because they both ingest the plastic, but also get entangled in it and even sometimes have to climb over it or through it on the nesting beaches. So fast forward to where we are now, I think it's safe to say essentially every sea turtle on the planet will encounter and interact with plastic. They will either have a lethal or a sublethal interaction, and by sublethal, it will make them weaker, less likely to reproduce, make it more difficult to migrate and do all the important things sea turtles need to do. So that's kind of how I got involved with plastic pollution and was contacted by the founders of Plastic Pollution Coalition as they began to formulate an approach, and have been involved with Plastic Pollution Coalition since the beginning. So I want to kind of change the conversation a little bit to this idea of Blue Mind. I use the hashtag Blue Mind here and there if you want to follow the conversation about this idea. Really what it comes down to is that through all my education, I went to the 24th grade, got a lot of education. We always talked about the ecological and the economic benefits of nature, of a healthy environment. But we usually left out entirely the emotional wellness benefits of a healthy environment. There are lots of reasons why. I think some people didn't take it seriously. They didn't think it was hard science. They were unfamiliar with neuropsychology. So the idea that nature, water, oceans, in a healthy, clean, productive, thriving form is good for us cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, socially, physically, and even spiritually. We left that out, and we still do. We're still operating kind of from a 1992 talking points perspective. And one of the big takeaway messages I want to share is that when we undervalue nature, when we undervalue the ocean, bad things happen. And it's clear from history that when we undervalue each other and when we undervalue the natural world, the next step is that bad things happen. We treat each other poorly, we treat nature poorly. And we've done that with the ocean for a very long time. We've got to get the value equation right. We've got to bring in this big missing piece, which I refer to as blue mind. And another big point I want to make with my index card here is that when we describe a healthy ocean, describe a healthy environment, we get the story right. And when we understand that that emotional well-being, our emotional wellness is foundational to creating a regenerative blue economy, that's very important. And in fact, it is our emotional well-being. If we are not individually and collectively emotionally healthy, forget about sustainability, forget about a regenerative economy. It just can't happen on the individual level, as organizations, and even as nations. If we're emotionally unhealthy, we're just not going to get where we need to go. And that's where Blue Mind comes in and updates the conversation. And I like to call it the new water story. So it's a process that is underway right now, making Blue Mind common knowledge and common practice. It connects back to this plastic pollution issue, because when we leave the emotional wellness benefits out of the story, we undervalue nature. And it allows us to pollute places with materials like plastic. It allows us to despoil animals like sea turtles and not be as bothered by it. So when we fix that story and update that equation, what we see is we build a bigger movement. We build a bigger group of people and institutions and funders to support this regenerative blue economy. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. We'll get into the details a little bit later, but suffice it to say that when you go to the beach or the ocean, a lake or a river, to relax your mind, to reconnect with someone you care about, and it's trashed by plastic pollution, your blue mind goes right out the window and red mind enters in. And that is our anxiety and fear-based response. That is not a healthy place to live. So I will leave it at that for now and hand the baton over to our next panelists.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks very much for that. And now I'd like to introduce Imari Walker-Franklin. Imari Walker-Franklin is a research chemist at Research Triangle Institute International. She completed her PhD at Duke University, investigating the release, transformation, and effects of polymer-associated chemicals within aquatic environments. Imari uses her science communication-based YouTube channel to share information about plastic pollution, microplastics, and potentially harmful chemicals associated with these consumer products. Imari Walker-Franklin and Jenna Jambak are the co-authors of the book Plastics, which is a part of the MIT Essential Knowledge series and is coming out soon, I think in August. Yeah. Welcome, Imari.
Thank you, Dianna. Hi, everyone. I think I've got a few slides to share with you all, so we can go to the first slide. So again, my name is Dr. Imari Walker-Franklin. I'm at RTI, which is a research nonprofit geared towards improving the human condition. that's headquartered in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. As a quick disclaimer, these are all what I'm going to share, my own thoughts and opinions. And for the next few minutes, I'm just going to share a short introduction to what is the impact of plastics life cycle. We got to start first with kind of what are plastics. We may kind of understand that plastics might be a relatively new concept in some ways, but plastic's been around for a long time, especially natural plastics themselves. In 1600 BC, Mesoamerican people harvested latex to convert to things like rubber balls and even figurines. Those are what we would define as actually natural polymers, since they come from materials like trees and plants. However, the plastic that we see today, majorly sourced from fossil fuels, oil, and gas, and they're denoted as synthetic polymers. Plastic can represent a large class of materials where they can be as thin and flexible and translucent as films that wrap frozen TV dinner trays, to as inflexible and durable as a drinking water pipe. Right now, there's over 5,300 commercially available formulations for plastics in the market. However, 6 of those are probably the most commonly produced, and not all of those can even be recycled at this point. In addition to those plastics, there's over 10,000 chemicals known to be incorporated into plastics with the purpose of increasing the functionality, the durability, and even the aesthetics of the polymer. So plastic as a material is used in nearly every industry, with the widest demand seen in packaging, textiles, consumer products, transportation, construction, and electronics. In fact, the wide variety of applications for this material led to an exponential increase in production since World War II. Since 2015, over 8.3 billion metric tons of new plastic has been produced, and if we continue business as usual, that number is predicted to grow. Depending on the plastic, the length of time a product is actually valued as a good can vary before it's quickly labeled a waste. And due to a lack of a circular economy, most plastic is only used for, once for a very short time frame, like things including packaging, beverage bottles, straws, and even grocery bags before they're disposed of. Some common methods for waste disposal for plastics include landfills, incineration, recycling, or even being discarded into the environment. A large majority of waste ends up actually accumulating in landfills in particular, with about 79%. And just about 12% has been shown to be incinerated, and 9% of all plastic produced has been recycled globally. But when we look closer to the United States, that number is actually closer to 5%. And depending on the waste management infrastructure of the location, plastic can have the potential to be released into the environment itself. So the majority of plastic waste that you can find in even our oceans or our waterways actually originates from land-based sources, including things like our landfills that blow off debris, to water treatment plants that filter out trash, and even roadsides that have stormwater runoff of litter, and even tire rubble that's coming off from driving. Terrestrial and urban environments can contribute up to 80% of ocean plastic pollution. And that's because it's being transported from freshwater streams and rivers. And with the same business as usual practices, we're predicting that it could be around 23 to 29 million metric tons per year that end up being released into the ocean by 2040. And once in the water, plastic can float and be transported on those currents to places like the Great Ocean Garbage Patch that was mentioned earlier, to even being able to sink into neighboring sediment and shorelines, where the surrounding environment can interact with the plastic product. Plastic can take, a few years to hundreds of years to even thousands of years to actually fully degrade. And that is actually very dependent on the polymer type, the polymer-associated chemicals that are inside the material, and the environment that the plastic is located in. Plastic within aquatic and land environments can undergo degradation due to exposure to things like water, higher temperature, sunlight, air, and even physical abrasion, like when a wave hits a bottle. And all of these processes end up weathering the polymer surface, which causes discoloration, brittleness, and microcracks to form on the surface. And that is what ends up releasing things called fragments and microplastics and nanoplastics. And in addition to those small fragments, there are actually chemicals that can be released from weathering plastics, including those chemicals associated with plastic in particular. Weathered plastic debris, in the environment is actually being described by some scientists as a planetary boundary threat. This is because plastic is now a form of almost chemical pollution that can release novel entities globally in a way that's not readily reversible and can lead to ecotoxicological hazards. Microplastics in particular are an example of difficult to recover plastics that we can find just about anywhere that we look within our air, water, and soils. From the aspect of climate change, plastic's life cycle is very much related to the global climate issue. For one, the majority of plastic produced uses fossil fuels as a feedstock. And two, microplastics can cover the surface of the ocean and impede photosynthesis for phytoplankton that's critical to the ocean carbon cycle and to providing oxygen on Earth. Plastics in the aquatic environment are also a potential hazard to organisms that live in those environments. One particular interaction observed is with birds and fish species that ingest plastic items. Plastic consumption has actually been reported within 1,200 marine species and at least 200 terrestrial and freshwater species. Some of those impacts from organisms consuming debris include nutritional dilution, digestive clogging, and even starvation. And not, just going past the physical effects, we can think about the chemical effects from those polymer-associated chemicals placed in the plastics that can also be harmful or toxic to wildlife. But most polymer-associated chemicals have not actually been fully tested for their toxicity as on an individual level or as a mixture of chemicals in the environment. Humans are also exposed to plastics in a multitude of ways, from our environment to even our indoor home. We can witness this in the media headlines for microplastics being found in our food and beverages, but we can think about the macroplastics that we interact with on an everyday basis, whether that's clothing, medicine, our indoor dust, to cosmetic products and food. Microplastics and nanoplastics in particular are plastics that are being seriously studied by scientists to understand what are the impacts to human health when you're inhaling, ingesting, and even being dermally exposed to these particles. And we can see from observations that we are now finding microplastics in human blood, in veins, in the lung tissue, placenta, and even the digestive tract for humans. Additionally, there are also inequitable burdens of plastic pollution globally. For example, communities that live near production facilities or polluted environments to recycling and incineration facilities can be exposed to higher levels of harmful chemicals, microplastics, and just general plastic pollution. Many of those communities have less political recognition and less economic means to relocate, which creates a really large environmental justice issue. And not accounting for the fact that there's also economic loss and even psychological impacts from littered environments and beaches. So to wrap up, we know that plastic production is currently rising, but that can always change. Oceans are a major sink for plastic pollution and can lead to an increased threat to biodiversity in the food chain. And pollution transcends national boundaries and creates a very global issue. And because it takes so long to degrade, recovery is also going to be an issue, along with the fact that we can't even recover a lot of the plastic components as well, causing some inequitable burdens for those that are exposed to all the pollution. But there are things that we can do as a community and as organizations to make this change, and we can chat more about those in the Q&A. Just sharing with you all the book that was highlighted previously. This is coming out August 22nd, and it's a short to easy read for anyone that wants to learn more about the impact of plastics life cycle. And yeah, feel free to screenshot my contact information if you have any additional questions or just want to connect. Passing it off.
Thank you so much, Imari. And I'm looking forward to reading your book. And we also just shared the link for anyone who's interested in pre-ordering it in the chat. So now I'd like to introduce our final panelist, Dr. Sylvia Earle. Sylvia is a pioneering marine biologist and National Geographic Society Explorer in Residence who has made groundbreaking contributions to ocean exploration. She was the first woman scientist to live and work in an underwater habitat, has authored over 200 publications, and has received many prestigious awards, including being named Time Magazine's first hero for the planet. In 2022, Plastic Pollution Coalition nominated Sylvia for the Earthshot Prize. Currently, Sylvia leads the Mission Blue Sylvia Earle Alliance, focusing on protecting Earth's biodiversity through hope spots. Welcome, Sylvia.
Thank you for having me as a part of the action. This is such an important topic. You know, if I were an evil alien wishing to alter the nature of life on Earth, two things I would do: change the temperature, change the chemistry. And guess what? Through our actions, human actions, we're doing both, with changes that have rapidly scaled up since the beginning of what geologists are calling the Anthropocene. Some mark that to about 200 years ago, but literally in the middle of the 20th century, starting then, that is when, from then to the present time, we have learned more about who we are, where we've come from, where we might be going, than during all preceding history, partly because of technologies that enable us to connect the way we're connecting now, and many other means of being able to share the new knowledge that has arisen. Kids of today are armed with knowing what nobody could know when I was a child. Like, what does Earth look like from space? What's it like in the deepest parts of the ocean? Knowledge about the microbes that live within us that make our existence possible. So much that we now know. I come from the geological era that might be called the pre-Plasticozoa. That is, before the 1950s, the plastics that now really infuse our planet and the air, the water, the living systems in the earth, they just didn't exist. A few synthetic materials were getting underway in the 1950s, but not on the scale that has come to exist globally, from high in the atmosphere to the greatest depths of the ocean, in the soil, in us, in all of life. We really can't escape this era of turning oil and sometimes coal, distilled in a different way, into forming these synthetic materials, plastics. You could call this the Plasticocene era of life on Earth, because of the profound effect that these wondrous materials that in some ways have served humankind so well seemed like a great idea at the time that they began to be developed, and they still obviously seem like a good idea to a lot of people because we're making more and more of them. I, for most of my life, have really been focusing on whatever it takes to protect the natural systems that make our existence possible, land and sea. And some years ago started Mission Blue to work with champions, with communities, with anybody and everyone willing to get behind the concept of special places in the ocean, and including now the Great Lakes, really the idea to give hope to the world by protecting nature, to go from any place that they might be to get to a better place of protection. And this past year, globally, recognition for the importance of nature is being recognized, with the concept of at least 30% of the land and 30% of the ocean to be highly or fully protected by 2030. That's 7 years from now. Big challenge, because only about 15% of the land has such protection. And if you really stretch it somewhat, you could say about 3% has a rather high, substantial level of protection, meaning that 97% of the ocean, top to bottom, the greatest living space on Earth, where 97% of Earth's water is kind of up for grabs, up for use without constraints that we really have to think about if we are to have a viable future. However, even that 3% of the ocean that is protected and the 15% that is, quotes, protected on the land, there's plastic, because plastic doesn't know boundaries. It's in the air, it's in the water, it's in, well, all aspects of the earth. I suppose if you drill down deeply enough into the earth itself, you might find places where plastic has not yet penetrated, but we've done such a good job of altering the nature of nature, altering the chemistry of the planet, altering the temperature of the planet through what we're putting into the sky, what we're putting into the ocean, the ways that we have deliberately changed the nature of life on Earth. But is it too late? That's the big question, to reverse this trend of decline that now has the attention of leaders, has the attention of kids all over the world. Climate is a major issue. And you might ask, so what do plastics have to do with climate? They have a lot to do with climate, because we're talking about the carbon cycle. Follow the carbon. Economists follow the money. Scientists and economists are now following the carbon. And in every case, it takes us straight into the ocean. Look at the carbon on this image. The small creatures that photosynthesize in the surface waters of the ocean down to a depth of, we don't know exactly how deep, but the greatest concentration is in the upper 200 meters. That's just the skin of the ocean. There are other processes deep in the sea called chemosynthesis that complements photosynthesis, but it's capturing carbon. The little green things, diatoms, prochlorococcus, many forms of phytoplankton, take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, generate oxygen that maintains Earth in a habitable way as we know it. I mean, before there were such green creatures, life existed, but with limited oxygen, and certainly not enough to maintain creatures such as we, or most of the rest of life on Earth as we know it today. Okay, so right now, we are seeing changes in the phytoplankton in the ocean that provides sustenance and oxygen for zooplankton, the small animals that consume the small plants. It's the carbon cycle in action. Carbon dioxide plus water equals food, and food goes to these other small creatures, and that in turn provides sustenance for little fish, squid, and other intermediaries such as krill in Antarctica that either consume phytoplankton directly or the zooplankton. This is the food chain in action. We know this from the land when, a tiger eats small animals or sometimes biggish animals, but the nutrients go back into the system. It's a circular economy. There is no waste in nature. It's an eat and be eaten world. It's the carbon cycle in action. It's been going on since the beginning of life on Earth with the cycling of nutrients, the cycling of carbon. So during my experiences underwater, thousands of hours, occasionally I get to witness the food chain in action. You can see birds diving in from the surface, sharks, dolphins, and the bigger fish eating the small fish. Everybody's having a great time except the little fish. But this is life. This is how it works. Birds on the land eating insects and then cycling the nutrients into the soil. This is what has shaped Earth over eons into the planet that we now rely on for our existence. So now, in addition to phytoplankton, zooplankton, little fish, and big fish in the ocean, as you've been hearing, there's an avalanche of these synthetic materials. One of the big issues, one of the big sources, is gear that has been developed to catch ocean wildlife. We call it the seafood industry, mostly the industrial extraction of ocean wildlife that really affects not just the creatures in the shallow surface waters, but now even in the deepest ocean. We're taking fish deeper and deeper from the sea, not just from where fishing was possible when I was a child, and even into the 60s and 70s. But with new technologies, new materials, and new applications, fishing has become the greatest consumer of plastic materials, synthetic materials that have been mobilized to capture ocean wildlife. So we couldn't catch them on the scale that we now do without these synthetic materials that provide the capacity to go anywhere and take on a scale that simply is unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. I was in Antarctica with the Ocean Geographic Society in Mission Blue in February of this year. We sampled for plastics every day in the water using fine mesh nets. And it was comprehensive everywhere. We found, even in this remote part of the planet, true also in the Arctic during earlier explorations, plastic has reached polar regions and even the deepest sea. The filter feeding animals like krill in Antarctica that capture not only the plankton that they require for their sustenance, but of course they take in these little bits and fragments, these little threads of the plastic materials that make up our clothing, make up fishing lines, make up fishing nets, that fragment into not only the microplastic, but even into the nanoplastic at the molecular level. They can't escape it. They're swimming in it and they're consuming it inadvertently. I mean, if they could choose, they would probably avoid it, but they can't. It's just part of the way their system works. There we see some of that fine mesh material that is so tempting to just discard, because relative to the kinds of nets and lines and materials that were used for fishing 100 years ago, 70 years ago, even 50 years ago, now replaced by these lightweight, durable, and relatively inexpensive materials. That is, inexpensive in terms of the cost to the fishermen who acquire them. They're not inexpensive when you think of the total cost of what they do to the ocean and then back to humans and our survival. Then the cost is very large, but we do not account for it properly. It's not just birds such as this elegant albatross that sadly are just making do, building a nest right in the midst of a discarded this material made of filamentous plastic. But like so many other creatures, albatrosses are known for flying over the high seas and picking up squid and small fish, except now plastics that float are scooped up as well. And again, without really understanding the consequences, the parents of the young birds feed the plastic to their offspring. And not only are the adults getting tangled in the nets and the lines when they go fishing in the ocean, but then they feed these little fragments and cigarette lighters and toothbrushes and all these other wonderful plastic materials that we've generated to their offspring and displace the space that the young ones have in their stomachs. And the consequence is that a large number of young seabirds now, not just albatrosses, perish before they're ever able to fly. So it goes into whales, it goes into little fish, it goes into big fish, goes into birds, and it goes back into us when we consume ocean wildlife. And it is a major issue, not just killing wildlife directly with nets and lines and traps. The wildlife suffers because of what they ingest directly, either directly lethal or sublethal in terms of reducing their resilience.
Building off of what you were just talking about, Sylvia, I'd like to actually direct a question towards Jay. And that is, we've been asked, what do we know for certain about how plastic affects our physical and mental health? And I think, could you also talk to this plastic pollution anxiety?
Yeah, so I think the research is becoming quite clear. University of Plymouth, a lot of the research coming out of the UK is showing, that when we go to the ocean to recreate, to feel better, to manage our emotional health, and we find it despoiled by plastic pollution, it doesn't do those things. In fact, it makes us angry, frustrated, sad, more red mind, more gray mind. That's anxiety and burnout. We don't need more of that. We've got enough on planet Earth. We need more creativity. We need more collaboration. We need more compassion and empathy. And so the psychology research has become pretty clear that plastic in the environment does nothing good for us, does nothing good for our fellow inhabitants, human and otherwise. From the plankton that Sylvia so eloquently described, to the fish, to the bigger animals that are interacting. So I recognize that there's a lot of bad news that needs to be shared, but if we share it in the wrong way, we're making our children very, very sad. And some of them are becoming depressed. And that is not a place for action. Sad, depressed people do not create movements. They do not solve problems creatively. So that's our challenge, is how do we present the dire situation in a way that is loaded with actions and solutions and hope. And I think our panel is led by the champion for oceans of hope and blue hope spots. So we have a roadmap, thankfully. We just need to do a better job helping people stay out of their red mind and gray mind.
Yeah, and sorry to bring us still into the red mind, but Imari, I'm wondering if you could just talk again about, help us better understand like the environmental justice implications of plastic.
Yeah, and I think that when we talk about environmental justice, there's a couple different models of justice. The first one is the idea of developmental justice, which is the idea that the right of industry and economic systems to be able to grow and flourish. But most people actually think about environmental justice from a distributive justice perspective, where there are uneven harms from plastic pollution, particularly for workers, women, children, reproductive health in general, along the lines of race and socioeconomic class, like fence-line communities. So if we're talking about communities where oil is extracted, refined, distilled, or even manufactured, those communities are disproportionately exposed to large quantities of toxic chemicals or even just the components themselves. And then even the fact that there's a lack of affordable, accessible alternatives to plastic means that people don't have a lot of agency to make their own choice for plastic exposure. And then other examples include procedural justice, environmental first justice, which is the idea that flora and fauna should not be harmed, regardless of whether that harm impacts humans. So the idea of setting a threshold for pollution would not fit within an environmental first approach for justice. And then another last one is indigenous sovereignty. So a lot of locations are actually getting waste, traveling globally on these, ocean conveyor belts to their land, to their waterways. And with an indigenous sovereignty approach, it's really the idea that this waste is accumulating on indigenous lands and it's infringing on their sovereignty and their right to govern their land, their water, and their lives. So there's a lots of different options for that, but this is a big issue. And I'll share the link for anyone who wants to learn more about that.
Thank you, Imari. I wanted to shift us into some of the solutions, and let's talk about what are some positive actions. I can think of some off the top of my head I'd love to share as well, but what are some positive actions we can take to support a regenerative blue? Sylvia.
Well, the last image that appeared in my presentation was a little kid going like this. We now know what could not be known until right about now. Knowledge is the key. Imagine if we did not know the magnitude and the extent of the problems that plastic materials have created for our existence. We tend to look at the good things. Oh, we've got plastic buttons and this and that and the other thing. But think about what you personally can do in your own everyday life. It's individual choices times 8 billion that are at the heart of solutions. Nobody can do it all, but everybody can do something. And some people can do a whole lot, those with authority, with decision-making power. And nations are now coming together with a concept of a plastics treaty that will begin to address this issue on a global scale. Get behind those individuals with magnified power, but don't think that you personally cannot make a difference through your choices, what to wear, what to eat, what to buy. Again, takes all of us working together.
Right on. I don't know, Jay or Imari, if you'd like to add any thoughts to what would bring about a regenerative blue. Imari.
Oh, a good one. So I think in general, just kind of addressing plastic pollution, acknowledging that everyone may not even be able to make all the decisions that they can because plastic is their only option, especially if we think about places where water may not be clean and accessible. So acknowledging that and acknowledging that, there are ways that we can try and influence change, whether that's local governments trying to provide better, cleaner water and organizing on that level to even just writing a letter to companies to ask them to provide better alternatives to what you're being exposed to and have options. But I agree. I think that we all, deserve the right to have information about this issue and be able to organize and create change.
Jay?
Yeah, I just add to what Sylvia and Imari have already said that meet people where they are and meet them with kindness and positive intentions. I raised 2 daughters with Dianna, and we always encountered people who were kind of doing the wrong thing with their plastic. And part of the lesson with my own kids was, how do you influence them in a way that doesn't make an enemy, but makes an ally? And so just thinking about that, how would you like to be treated if you unknowingly were trashing something that you just didn't understand? You might want to be treated with kindness and a helping hand to help you figure it out and learn and make a small adjustment. And then you've got the people who are ready to roll up their sleeves and literally run through walls right now. Go for it. Like, seriously, we'll just stand out of your way and you go change the world. But there are people who need a little more help, like baby steps. So, meet people where they are, meet them with kindness. And we got to build this blue movement to be much, much, much larger and much more diverse until we get to all 8 billion people count themselves among this blue movement. So I think kindness is the secret to it.
I agree with you, Jay. I agree with what everyone's saying. And I always pops into my mind, or I hold in my heart, Sylvia saying we live on a blue planet, that the ocean and water make life possible on Earth, and that we have to protect the blue heart of the planet, the ocean, giving us all life. I wanted to just add that, the Global Plastic Treaty and federal policy that is going to be reintroduced. It's currently called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, are wonderful, powerful tools that we can all get behind and support. And also, there are wonderful tools like brand audits and brand identification from cleanups and different efforts like that, that really empower people to take action wherever they're coming from, wherever they're at, and turn around and let companies and corporations know that we are not okay with them polluting our neighborhoods and our families. So to that, I think we need to wrap up. I just was wondering if any of you had one big thing that you wanted people who are watching this to take away, just a quick thought from the conversation today. I'll circle back to Sylvia.
Well, I look to the questions that kids are asking. It's their future. It's ours too, our present. But be like a kid. Ask questions. Where did this, whatever it is, come from that I'm consuming? Ask what you can do. Look in the mirror. Everyone has power. Not everyone uses their power productively, but everyone can and everyone should. In mind, we need to keep Earth habitable now and far into the future for ourselves and for all the rest of life on Earth as it currently exists, as far as we can see. And that's it. Take action based on answering the questions that everyone has the power to take on.
Thank you. And Imari?
I would just say work on just being a little bit more aware of things you interact with on a daily basis. Think about how, intertwined they've kind of basically put all these products in front of us, and really just take a look around to see if there are some great alternatives or refillable systems near you, to ways that you can continue to reuse things that you may have only used once, to keep in circulation. So really think about things like that.
Jay?
I would say get in the water as much as you can. Take somebody with you, fall in love, swim in it, float on it, dive in it, boat on it, surf on it, skip a rock on it. If your water is in trouble, help your water so that we can get in it and on it. Take somebody with you, log off of these things. They're kind of dumb. Log off of Zoom and get wet as often as you can, and just keep falling in love with that feeling. It's what drives all of us. I just want to add one little anecdote. This beautiful film that Sylvia made about Mission Blue, beautiful film. And there's this one scene, it's heartbreaking. And she's diving on a coral reef that has seen better days, let's just put it that way, with a friend of hers. But when they got out of the water, they were connected to each other, they were connected to themselves, and they were fired up and joyful. And it was so beautiful. I mean, Sylvia is beautiful on land, but Sylvia is so incredibly amazing in the water. And it was just like the whole screen just lit up with that emotion. And that's what stuck with me. It was in the face of heartbreak. The water will still take our grief and put us back on land to work harder. So just keep going to the water and celebrating it is my reminder.
Thank you. So thank you very much to all of our panelists, Jay, Imari, Sylvia, for joining us today and for providing valuable information and leading a fantastic conversation. It's very emotional for me. I feel so moved. I'd like to ask everyone to please mark your calendars for a special webinar on July 20th, our next one, Greening Hollywood Sets to Flip the Script on Plastics. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our global coalition. It's currently free to join as an individual, business, or a nonprofit organization. Connect with us on social media to learn more about our work at Plastic Pollution Coalition. And we will also be sending out a follow-up survey and appreciate your feedback if you can take a couple minutes to help us improve these. We will also try to answer questions we didn't get to today in a future blog, so keep an eye out for that. And thanks again to everyone for joining. Thank you also to our Plastic Pollution Coalition member groups and partners who shared this webinar with their communities and networks. Thank you to the Hollywood Climate Summit. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar on July 20th. See you soon. Thank you.